Hey, friends of Two Crones with a Mic. We're back for another episode. Thank you for being with us and tuning in. And we're going to have such a great episode ahead of us. We have somebody with us. Her name is Joni Lorraine. Am I pronouncing this correctly?
You got it right. Yes.
Okay, good. So we're so happy to have you. Thank you for making time. It's just an honor and a pleasure to have you. As far as I'm understanding, you are going to lead us into a short grounding meditation, a bowl ringing something. Aren't you?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Indira has invited me to share with everyone this is really a simple process that a lot of spiritual
Okay.
directors just use before we settle into having a session with someone. So I invite you to sit back. Let's not be surprised by 2 or 3 minutes of silence on the podcast. We are actually sitting in intentional meditation to center ourselves.
And
So,
don't be surprised when you hear a loud gong, because there will be a loud gong here in just a few minutes as well. That can be a little off-putting. So, yeah.
yes, and then we'll use another a little bit of sound also to close us out of this time. So I invite you guys and everyone listening to enter into a moment of quiet to consider taking yourself from your head to your heart. Sometimes that's a long trip, even though it's 12 inches physically. So I invite us to enter into that space where we can begin to listen and see with our hearts rather than our heads. Welcome back.
Thank
That was
you.
good. That was really
We
good.
need the silence sometimes,
I
right?
do, yeah. So,
And
So,
Joni,
mhm,
I just forgot to mention that Joni is a spiritual director. So, that's what
yeah,
we're talking about today.
yes, and
yeah.
in our sessions, I would say in our sessions, at least in mine, we that was just a couple of minutes. And sometimes, when I sit with my spiritual director, you can sit as long as you like.
Love
I
that.
enjoyed that.
5 or 10 minutes, whatever
Mm-hmm.
whatever
Mm-hmm.
feels right for whoever I'm companioning. So
Yeah.
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 So speaking of meditation, this is why you're here, Joni. Joni is well, I'm gonna give them the term that we use at work, Jones, and that is she is my work wife. Joni and I have worked together for almost 3 years now. Yesterday was my 3-year anniversary at our place of employment, which means yours is coming up.
It is.
Yeah. And Jones was hired specifically to be the program coordinator for the spiritual direction program for Unity Worldwide Spiritual Institute. And I got the pleasure and the honor of working with her pretty closely as she began to develop the program. I did a lot of like enrollment policy writing, and we did a lot of discussions around things. We've had a lot of laughter. We've had a lot of some tears, some blood, some sweat, some like all of it, and it has been so great getting to know her. And she is the one person that can always bring me down when I like, not like take me, but bring me like when I am wound up and I am not feeling grounded at all. She's the one person that can always ground me. And I was sitting in meditation asking Spirit, who do we need to bring in to interview on the podcast? And her face was the one that appeared. And I was like, that's pretty genius, because we talk a lot about, well, it's a whole podcast about spirituality and about living your spiritual life and trying to make that balance between spiritual life and physical life. So, and your existence. And spiritual direction, I think, is one of the great tools that we have that not very many people know about. So I'm going to open up the mic. Tell us about you, anything and everything you want the audience to know about who you are, what you've done, about spiritual direction, and even about like the education to become a spiritual director, both through the program you went through and the program that you run potentially.
Sure. That's plenty.
It is.
So I think I want to start by something that you said about grounding, that I can support you in being a grounding presence, and that's exactly what the work is. It is the work of we use excuse me, we use spiritual means to ask spiritual questions to explore our spiritual experience, and that doesn't happen it doesn't even, I'm just going to be frank here, it doesn't even happen in church.
Right.
Wow.
So there are churches where it can happen, but more often than not, there are folks out there who are deeply spiritual. This is the first time since in the history of Pew Research that more than 50% of the people that they have polled have said they're spiritual but not religious.
Yeah.
So where do we take those yearnings, those longings to deepen our experience of the spiritual in the lives we're living? And in 2024 and 2023, 22, 21, and 2019, let's go back to 16, maybe 15.
Yeah.
The things that have begun to bubble up, and our culture here in our country, people have a longing that you don't need therapy for, but it's this discomfort, this yearning, this longing to make some meaning out of life and what's going on.
Mm-hmm.
And who do we talk to about that? Who do we? And there are you might have spiritual friends, and my podcast is my spiritual friends is what I'm looking at the title. So my spiritual friends, yeah. So
And that's coming up, correct?
Right, that is coming up.
Good.
And who do we go to?
Mm-hmm.
Therapists are typically taught out of talking about religion or spirituality, and their approach is from obviously a mental health point of view. So they solve problems by diagnosing something and and looking at your mental health.
Right.
A physical doctor looks at your physical health. And while a spiritual companion slash director is not a doctor, we are trained to, and this is the trick, we are trained to listen to the voice of, the shorthand is the voice of God, or whatever you choose to call your higher or inner or deepest power. Your ultimate power. Ground of all being is a great way to use that language. Ground of all being covers all of that for me. And you can come in and visit with a spiritual director for an hour about your spiritual longings or what's bothering you. And sometimes, I will say, sometimes mental health counseling, sometimes pastoral counseling that ministers do, and sometimes there are chaplains in hospitals, and in some of the churches where I attend, there are chaplains that do their work within the church. But those are different roles. But there is a Venn diagram that sometimes that there are mental health counselors who are called to spiritual direction. So they do spiritual direction and they use that back and forth. Sometimes counseling will come up. But one of the things that spiritual directors are strongly trained in is to not cross those boundaries. We're not mental health counselors. We're not ministers. We don't use, and this is what I love about the work most of all, we don't use theological means to answer questions. We're trying to bracket all the things that we have and the ideas that we have about what the answers are, and invite the person that we're companioning to look within and explore what God is doing and saying in their own lives. So most of the work comes from being an open vessel to what Spirit is saying in the moment that we're being with folks.
That's
and
cool.
Yeah. So that's
so
what
cool.
that is. And I run a program for Unity Worldwide Spiritual Institute, where we train people to do that work. And it is a passion that I have had for several years. I was a prayer chaplain in a Unity church for 14 years here in Central Texas, in the Austin area where I live. And I didn't want to, I wasn't called to be a minister. I mean, I was called to be, how do I describe? I was called to be a minister, but not of a church. And I want to say that everybody's got a calling to minister in some way or another. And mine was more along the lines of caring for people, listening, compassion. That was a thread that had always run throughout my life. Yeah, I'll say here that even in a previous vocation, which I spent many, many, many years doing as an actor and director of live theater, it ran through that too. It runs through that liminal space of being the present, of people being in the present together and having this rich, sacred experience. Theaters were our first churches.
It's true.
It's true. And so that's been a thread in my life. So the best thing I could look for, I knew of spiritual direction, a guru, if you will, I'm going to use that word, Reverend Dr. Robert Brummett, had already begun doing some spiritual direction work within the churches that I was attending in small workshops. And I attended one of his workshops. However, by the time I put my foot down and said I was going to go to seminary, it didn't look like a possibility to me that was going to be what I would be able to do. So I entered into seminary at Seminary of the Southwest. It's an Episcopal seminary here in Austin. It is one of the few schools left that is exclusively in person. So that was brilliant and beautiful until it wasn't in person. And the pandemic rolled around. And it's a gorgeous, beautiful place. And I got a master's degree in what's called spiritual formation, which will help me bring everyone up to speed on kind of understanding what spiritual direction is. So spiritual formation is the literal work of sitting in your own growth spiritually, examining the spiritual in your life, expanding it. And some of us, it's like an education, if you will. Some of us have some great spiritual formation going on, and others do not. In fact, the recordings I'm working on right now for my podcast are with the first season are with LGBTQ folks. Now, LGBTQ folks can have an enormous amount of gorgeous and beautiful spiritual formation, but they may have been told things that are not accurate, spiritual malpractice, I like to call it. Many of them have experienced even spiritual abuse. So their formation or their let me say our, since I'm also an LGBTQ. So our formation could be very different from someone who had no barriers to that. Some folks who are evangelical and or not evangelical, or maybe even Christian Science, you get those experiences twisted up in a certain kind of way, and your formation, just like any education, is going to be less than stellar, or it can be gorgeous and beautiful. So spiritual direction is not necessarily spiritual formation, but it is the work of supporting someone's spiritual formation. I like to say spiritual quotient, really, your spiritual intelligence, which is beautiful and incredible. So it supports that. And so I did spiritual formation and a concentration in chaplaincy, and I got extra hours. So I have just as many hours in spiritual direction as I do hospital chaplaincy. And that is a gorgeous, gorgeous vocation and ministry. And I certainly expected that when I graduated, that I would move from an internship I'd already done to a residency in a hospital, and I would be my own ministry, walking around taking care of people who are in hospitals. And it's extraordinary. It's extraordinary work. I love it just about as much as spiritual direction. However,
Question.
yeah, go ahead. No.
Well, one of the questions, can we go back to LGBTQ IA plus? Their spiritual formation could be less than stellar. Do you have an example of what that might look like for an LGBTQ person? And can we also do that as an example for someone who maybe experienced some kind of spiritual malpractice that may not have been LGBTQ by chance?
Sure.
Do you have examples?
Sure. These are going to be these are going to be generic, and I'll tell you, they'll be generic not because I want to keep anything anonymous, but because I want to take this moment to say that I had a deeply wonderful experience of coming out. I didn't run into religious issues. I did have a brother who has since passed, that he spent a short period of time, and I was having none of it. and he tried, and after a certain point, it's like, that's nope. And so my whole family has been, in general, they've not been particularly, they weren't especially particularly accepting when they first learned, but I want to say they did their work. And that's a part of spiritual that's a way of creating a kind of spiritual formation, some emotional intelligence around, I feel this way. This is not my sister's issue. It's my issue. And my mom was great about that. And she wanted to continue to have a relationship with me. So, that was beautiful stuff. But some people don't experience that. They, I know of someone who is dealing with a family that loves them very much right now, and this family is so attached to what they believe are what we call the clobber passages in the Bible. Leviticus, the man shall not lie with. We call them the clobber passages. And I just want to say, for the record, those passages are an interpretation
Yeah.
that someone created.
Mhm.
There are a bazillion interpretations that scholars have written. And if you're interested in this, there's a woman named, well, she's got a book. It's called Walking the Bridgeless Canyon. And she's an evangelical who turned researcher because she felt that evangelicals needed to know
Mhm.
and get history and accurate information. So
Kathy Baldock. Kathy
yes,
Baldock.
with a K, and her work is gorgeous. And it turns out that the passage that most people use is it was an it's kind of anticlimactic, but it was an innocent error. It was an
Hmm.
innocent error. So, and we have been dealing with an innocent error in interpretation for years and decades and decades and decades. So
Wow.
that's one of that's actually the biggest
Mhm.
example of that. And you had another question about
Yeah, if you're not LGBTQIA plus, is you know, what would be a potential example of experience, like just I don't want. Do we call it a negative spiritual formation, or do we just call it a spiritual formation that isn't supportive of someone's? I mean, I can't help but feel this is the whole purpose behind my question. I can't help but feel that the reason that people are wanting to be spiritual, not religious anymore, is simply because they're recognizing that religion isn't working for them anymore.
Mhm.
And a lot of times we're recognizing that because we have had experiences in the church. Case in point, in the church that I attended when I was a little kid, I was very confused about why God was very, very angry and vengeful and wrathful in the Old Testament, or as in Unity we call it in the Hebrew Scriptures, and then very forgiving and loving in the Christian Scriptures, right, or the New Testament. And my sister at the time had been diagnosed with manic depressive disorder. So she acted a whole lot like the Old Testament and the New Testament on any given day in my 11-year-old mind, right? And I asked my mom, like, is God manic depressive? Like, I don't understand. And mom said, well, we have this new young pastor at the church. Why don't you ask him? I was a very shy child. Bettina, the fact that you see me asking an ET 17 questions, that was not me when I was 11. I've grown into this person. Okay. And I was so afraid to ask the question. But mom said, it'll be safe. It'll be okay. And so I raised my hand, explained the situation, and I said, is God manic depressive? And he became so enraged at me that he grabbed my ear, took me by the ear to the adult Bible study where my mother was,
Wow.
called me a disrespectful child, humiliated me. And because my dad was there, my aunt was there, my grandma was there, like this was a family church, and then proceeded to throw me out the front door and lock the door
Wow.
and left me out there. And that could have been the end of my story with spirituality and religion. It wasn't, because I had a deeper connection, but it's those kinds of things that that is a formation. Aside from that, what could be some potential formations that would be leading to where we are right now that would make this study indicate that more than 50% of the people in our society are choosing to be identified as spiritual, not religious?
I well, you gave a perfect example of why lots of people aren't.
Yeah.
Yeah, but how many people have been thrown out by their ear for asking if God was manic depressive? Is there anything else?
They have certainly, I know they have certainly questioned
Mhm,
that, and I mean,
mhm,
we have certainly questioned, and um, I want to be loving about this and also frank. There are folks out there who don't don't exhibit the compassion that some of us believe Jesus intended.
Yeah. Thank you.
And that's it. That's
Mm-hmm.
it. That's one thing. Other things are uh, other things are people. this is just pretty. This is just pretty logical human things. I know for myself that when I was raising kids, there's how to get them there. Uh, there's a secular approach that Americans have that now have that there's soccer practice or softball or baseball or practice, and it happened. Those happen at the same time that church happens, and
Mm-hmm.
so much we can't fit everything into a weekend,
Mm-hmm.
which brings me back to a benefit of spiritual direction is to take you out of the world
Mm-hmm.
And
and
into
into
yourself, right?
yourself, right?
Which
Um,
Ramadir just told us, and when we did an interview, that we are very much an aspect of God. So going within us and saying that we are going in within to, as Charles Fillmore, who is one of the founders of Unity, he would say he would go into meditation to go to headquarters. It wasn't that he was going outside of himself; he was going within himself to meet with the energy of Jesus and Moses.
right, and I think you've reminded me that the appeal for a lot of people, it, in Unity at least, is that it is that internal work of God instead of an external somebody telling you things that don't resonate, that aren't true. That we are we're not just an aspect, we are an expression of
Right.
God.
Yeah.
Which is why we are co-creators in
Hmm.
our experiences. Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow.
Why would someone hire a spiritual director?
Well, if you knew about us,
Why wouldn't they?
I think, and this answer, I just want to preface this with this answer will be different depending on the spiritual director you ask.
Okay.
And in my case, because I define spiritual direction in my own personal way, I think that you would hire a spiritual director, first of all, if you want a spiritual friend. Lots of us don't have, and I'm blessed to be around plenty of people who want to have spiritual conversations. Like, what's the meaning of life? What do you think about God? I have conversations like, what do you think happens after when we die? And oh, I'm surprised by your answer. And we have open-hearted conversations about those things rather than uh, how would I put this? Rather than commiserating in agreement about what we think and judging other people by what they don't think or don't
Mm,
experience. So, to be specific about your question, it is so if you're interested in flourishing spiritually or just in general,
mhm,
instead of taking a problem to a mental health counselor or therapist, spiritual direction or spiritual companioning might be for you. And I want to reiterate spiritual, not religious counseling, not religion. You can bring that with you. You described something, Indira, perfectly about what a great I could have a great conversation with you if you were still in that space of trying to break through that barrier of your experience
mhm,
about religion and God and spirituality. People bring that kind of thing to the fore. It helps us to understand and make meaning of life.
mhm.
Yeah.
So if you
Can
want,
anybody be, yeah, I'm sorry. Can
no, so if
anybody
you,
be a spiritual director or can anybody learn to do that or?
Yes, anybody can. I would say I want to say in our program, we do look for people who have expressed a certain and demonstrated a certain kind of spiritual leadership. There's a level
Mm-hmm.
of wisdom. I think this is a great time to say an example of that is at the heart of where spiritual direction began in the 6th century with the desert mothers and fathers who left all that what is that stuff going on about religion and went to the desert, and other people saw what the desert mothers and fathers had, so they scampered out and said, show me what you got.
Uh-huh.
And so they have spiritual directors have they are people who have experience in their own spiritual life that they are willing to share with others, kind of give folks a guardrail. I call us Sherpas sometimes. We're just kind of
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
like you're on it's your journey. We're just kind of holding space for you, and that's
We're
what.
carrying
Yeah,
your
yeah.
backpack for a while.
Yeah,
Because it
let us.
does resonate. I mean, it really feels like this is something that I would be interested in, not just like for me helping others, but maybe that's just another avenue where I can do something good, but also just for me, maybe that's just something that I need to learn for my own growth, for my own spiritual health. Because I remember years ago, I went to a therapist. I was going through some more like mental health stuff. And after my divorce, and I don't remember everything he said, but I remember the first session he said, in order to be a whole person, you need to be healthy, your mind, body, and spirit. And of course, he provides the mind and the doctor provides the body, but he didn't say, and then you need to have somebody to provide for your spiritual health. And what you just said really makes sense. That makes sense. That adds just a piece to the puzzle for
Yeah,
people.
and that's really helpful for me going forward is in support of explaining what spiritual direction is. It's just
Mm-hmm.
it's a it's participating in your own spiritual health,
Yeah, it
and we
Do we
really
want
do
to go ahead? Go ahead.
and we do that by we just logistically we do that by meeting monthly.
cool.
It's not like mental health counseling where you go every
Right.
week and that sort of
Mm-hmm.
thing, because
Mm-hmm.
we
Mm-hmm.
think this is kind of an oxymoron for a unity person, but we we trust in what is called the slow work of God. So
Mm-hmm.
it takes we give room and time for things to resonate. Most of all uh, for for the person who is in spiritual direction to be able to see the movement of God in their lives,
Mm-hmm.
which is ultimately the bottom line definition that any spiritual director should give you, is that it's the experience of seeing the movement of God in your life. And that takes
Mm-hmm.
time. It's the slow work of God.
Right. So I guess you would not give theological answers. Like you said in the beginning, it wouldn't be like, oh, why is this happening? And then somebody says, well, God works in mysterious ways. So you wouldn't give those, I guess you wouldn't get those generic answers.
No, you're not going to get it. No.
And thank God for that.
Yes.
Yeah, the questions we ask are more. I would, in relation to that scenario,
Mm-hmm.
I would I would ask. I'd be curious about what's behind that.
Mm-hmm.
Say more about that. Just help me to understand where you're coming from,
Right.
rather than giving a pat answer. And
Exactly.
that doesn't mean that religious people, Catholics for a long time had the market on spiritual direction. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
they're big in having spiritual directors in their churches and sending
Richard
people to,
Rohr.
yeah,
Yeah.
sending people to spiritual directors. And so I don't want to get it confused.
No.
There are folks who are going to you can be religious and bring your religion, your Catholicism, your what have you, to your spiritual director.
Mhm.
And the work of the spiritual director is to be a chameleon, I guess,
Mm-hmm.
and serve the companion as God moves in the companion's life. Not my opinion, not my theological training,
Gotcha.
not my, not even my training if I'm a counselor.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Mm-hmm. I like that. I really do.
So I'll give the example. I'm going to tell the story. I think this is a
okay.
good time to tell the story. So last year, I was admitted to get my dual ordination with Unity. I'm a New Thought minister, ordained New Thought minister, and I decided to get my dual ordination with Unity. And Joni's been with me on this journey for quite some time. 3 years, as I said, and she was invited to come to one of our classes to speak about spiritual direction. One of our ministerial classes. And she had messaged me earlier in the day and was like, hey, I thought about maybe um, giving a sample, which we're actually going to do today on the podcast so people can get an idea. And in no way am I trying to influence this one way or the other, just to give my experience of spiritual direction. I'd had a couple of sessions with you, Joni, just where maybe I was going through a little bit of a dark night of the soul, and you just sat with me for about 30 minutes and just, worked with me. So I was familiar with it, and I was like, sure, we can do a sample. It's fine. And that was all we said. We did not plan anything for that day. And I had been going through a really, really hard time. I was feeling very devalued, invalid, in both my marriage and at work. Um, all of this was all coming up at once. And not to mention, I had lost my beloved dog in January, who was my best friend for 12 years. That dog got me through some really hard stuff. And so we get into class, and Joni's talking about spiritual direction, and I think first, I just have to say this is just my own observation. I think the people that were there thought that they were spiritual directors, and I thought that they were really shocked by the fact that they discovered that they weren't, and that they would have to go through a whole bunch more training in order to be considered. Because ministers are not spiritual directors, and that there's a completely different training. Ministers are trained to give exactly what you said, Bettina, to give that theological explanation. So Unity would give the unity teachings of this is why it's happening,
Yeah.
and this is how you can control it. And Bettina is very knowledgeable about Unity. She's been in Unity for a lot of her life, so she understands. So we get into class, and Joni's doing her thing, and then she was like, "All right, Indira, how are you doing?" And I literally go, "God is dead." Like I just, and she's like, "Oh, tell me more about that." And she was just so pleasant. Like, she wasn't that cheerful, actually. She was like, "Okay, well, tell me more about that." And I didn't want to get into all the details of what was going on in my marriage at the time, but there was, some stuff. And I absolutely did not want to get into what was going on in my work life, because these are people that it's a small community. Unity is a very small community. And I didn't want to name names at that point. And so I basically summed it up to the last time I saw the face of God was the day that I had put my dog to sleep. And then I began to sob. And she said, "All right, let's feel this pain. Obviously you're in pain. Let's take some time for you to really feel this pain," which immediately made all of my classmates very uncomfortable, because they're wanting her. They admitted they wanted her to start giving me all of the Unity teachings. They just wanted to get out of their discomfort as a result of my discomfort. And I will admit that on some weird level, I enjoyed watching them squirm a little bit, because, because I think we need to get over ourselves and trying to comfort people when they are experiencing discomfort. I think people need that opportunity to just cry and sob. And I think we all just need to be comfortable with people expressing their emotions. I just
Yeah,
do.
I agree.
And so there's a little part of me that was like, cry a little harder, just so they would squirm a little bit more. And when they gave their feedback, I don't know why you didn't go in and try to comfort her. I said, look, where I am right now, and Joni obviously recognizes this, I'm in absolute resistance. I am in so much pain that I am saying to you all that God is dead right now. I don't want to go in and try to find God in my heart. I don't want to hear all of those things about, God loves you and you're beautiful and all that. I don't need that. What I need is to feel fully the pain that I'm experiencing that makes me even think that God is dead right now. Joni's doing the right thing. And y'all just need to be uncomfortable with it. Like, that's just where I was. You just need to be uncomfortable with it. And what ended up happening is I very much found God. And I found God in the strangest place, which was in my own value. And I've actually heard people say this, not spiritual directors, because spiritual directors do not, necessarily, we discover it ourselves. But I discovered that through my, sitting and all of that, that my value and how I value myself is in direct correlation with my experience of God. And what's more is once I started to enforce my value in my relationships, whether it was at work or in my marriage, I was prepared to release anything that no longer valued me, including my marriage, which is still very much intact, and at work, which is also intact. So people were like, oh, you're redefining yourself according to your value. And then I found God again in a completely different way. God was no longer in the face of my beloved pet. God was staring back at me in my mirror saying, see, you are worth something. You didn't have to believe them. But it took some time. Like that was like October, like end of October, maybe November. I can't remember. And it took some time. I mean, I had to be really angry at God, and I had to be really angry at myself and at myself for believing everyone who told me that I didn't have value. And I had to be angry at them for telling me that. And then I had to move through the forgiveness of it all. And as I did, then I began to reflect back to me my value and my worth, and I found God again. But it took some time. But it was also very funny because she had no idea when we walked in there that I was like, God is dead, like I'm done. And I had the opportunity to watch everyone be really uncomfortable and try to save me when there was nothing to save. And I think that's the difference also between spirituality and religion. I feel like at times religion tries to save you.
Yes.
Tries to help you find God so you can be saved. And spirituality says, there's nothing to save, darling. You're going to save yourself, but it's not really saving. It's realizing. Joni?
Wow.
Well, a couple of things. That was amazing. And a session is an hour long. And I just want to say that Indira and I did 20 or 30 minutes, and that was what happened. So, hey, come on in, try that out.
Yeah.
That was a great testimony, if you will.
It was.
I keep these two affirmations, if you will, in front of me every day. One's really simple. You are worthy of taking up space.
Wow. Yeah.
And the other one is a little longer. The value and potential I possess is important enough to me that I'm going to give it the energy, space, and time to grow and create results.
I love both of those.
Those are great.
Yeah. So do you want, Bettina, how daring are you feeling today? You don't have to do the whole God is dead thing, but, and honestly, it just flew out of my mouth. And I was like, because I got tickled. Somebody was like, well, clearly you guys planned this. Woman, I am having a complete meltdown in class. Do you think I planned to have this meltdown? Do you think I planned to say God is dead? Oh no, it literally flew out my mouth. I thought how tone deaf can you be right now to say that? And again, not trying to judge, but wow, that was an insane thing to say to me. You must have planned this.
Wow.
I cried for months over that. Go ahead, Joni. Yeah.
I just wanted to throw out there before we moved on that we are trained as well. Are we? This is my approach. I'll just be careful about it. This is my approach, and some of my approach comes from that understanding, and my passion also for chaplaincy. And I think this is a huge benefit to any seminary program. Most seminaries send, at least for a semester, they're going to send you to do an internship in a hospital. And you discover like this is real for people.
Yes.
This is real. This is not some theological project of yours.
Mm-hmm.
And
this is real life.
This is real life. Yes. And for me, the gift that so first, it's a gift that you've given me, something so vulnerable and rich and deep.
Yeah.
And God exists there too. And if I am handing you, I'm truncating. I am blocking the work of God in you if I'm giving you an answer.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So, I see, I'm reluctant to say that because I don't have a judgment about religion that gives you answers.
Right.
And the work of spiritual direction doesn't give you answers. It seeks to allow answers to come forth in you.
Yeah.
And I find that when I'm allowed to find my own answers, it's more profoundly shifting for me. Even my therapist did it yesterday because my therapist is out of a church and very much believes in we have to incorporate God into it because that's what I need as a New Thought minister. I need the presence of God in my therapy, and in part because of the things that have happened. And I kept saying, just tell me. And she's like, no, I'm not going to tell you. You're going to discover it for yourself. I'm like, damn it. And Bettina, you'll discover here potentially here in a little bit that you do need, in order for it to really shift your consciousness, your awareness, shift your cellular structure, to feel it come kind of bubble up out of you. It's so much better than getting the standard answer of, well, because that's God's plan for you.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Right.
So
which is absolutely true.
Right. And also, it's a both and.
But
gotta meet,
Yeah. So I'm actually going to turn my mic off and let you do the sample of what spiritual direction is with Bettina.
Okay, and I'm another preface. I'm going to preface this with Indira had an amazing experience. They're not all like that.
And mine also lasted we had like 15 minutes, 20 minutes, something like that in class. This lasted for a few months. It took me a few months, and it took therapy, and it took coming back and talking to Joni about aspects of it in various ways. It took work to get to that place. It didn't happen in the 20 minutes. That was just when we peeled the layers back very quickly, and I was able to this is my problem. I do not see God in anything right now. And then that led to, why don't I? And so, yeah. All right.
Okay.
Bettina, I'm gonna invite, and Indira as a sacred witness, I'm gonna invite all of us, because we've been in our heads and we've just been talking about that, for us to go ahead and just take another minute or so to settle in. And whenever you're ready, Bettina, just give it a go.
So what am I doing? Am I just talking, or what am
I? Right now, we're just going to sit in the silence.
Okay, gotcha.
And you know what? You're right. And when it feels good, I will bring us out.
Okay, I'm ready for whatever. For whatever's happening.
uh, what is on your heart today?
On my heart, and I'm glad you bring this up because it just came to me right before we started this, is I know about myself that I have a lot of anger. And the anger is really directed at a lot of things. And I can pinpoint one thing is I grew up Catholic. And when I was a child, going to church, I was looking forward to it. It was so, it made me feel good. And I grew up in a community where everything was safe. Like all the things that Indira said, for example, none of that happened to me. I think I had just had a really good priest, but I didn't realize that until I got older. And being out of this community where I felt like the whole world is just love and light. And now I realize it's the opposite. I feel like I'm so angry that this part that used to make me happy is so overshadowed of so many things. It's kind of like the evil or the bad outweighs the good at the moment, where I feel like this Catholic thing that I had doesn't help me anymore. It's not enough anymore, if that makes sense. And so I'm really angry that so many that this whole world is like, and maybe I'm only seeing the bad things right now, but I feel like this whole world is just a dumpster fire. And every time I'm trying to do something good, it's I don't see where I'm making a difference. I feel like I have no feeling of success in changing things for the better. And then I'm like, I'm exhausted. Why am I doing this? Why do I even care? Why do I have to care? Why do I want to care? If that makes sense. So
Sure.
that's what I'm feeling.
Okay. I wonder if you feel like you're alone.
It's a possibility. Now I have to say I do choose to be alone a lot because I feel like if I don't have the right people around me, then I just have to I it's like I feel like with Indira, for example, if she's here with me, I feel good because whatever crazy thing I say, she's like, I get it. But that just doesn't happen with anybody. So my circle of people that I have in my life is extremely small, but it's by choice because I don't want to expend any more energy to change people's minds, if that makes sense. So maybe I am alone, but it's kind of by choice too.
Gotcha. Gotcha. So I'm going to get more specific about that.
Mm-hmm.
Do you feel do you feel alone in your spiritual in your spirit in the work you're uh, I'm going to say, do you feel spiritually alone?
I don't think so.
Okay.
I just feel like maybe I need to, because no, I don't. I just feel like maybe I need to get out more and find people that are actually want to do some action as far as like not just talking about things, not just talking about making things better, but maybe they're actually active in doing things, if that makes sense. Where I feel like, okay, I see my effort, I see the fruit of my labor, so to speak. You
Hmm.
know?
That sounds like a solution
Mm-hmm.
you've already worked through emotionally and
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
mentally. Um, Something that came up for me, and this is like the work of what we do. It's
Mm-hmm.
I look at what is kind of bubbling up for me and what I'm feeling, and I'm feeling sadness. I'm wondering if there are angels that want to help you, and they might be invited in. Um, and I'm wondering where this sadness, where does it live for you? Just in your body, where does it live?
It does live in my heart because
Anger.
yeah.
Yeah, it's anger. Sorry, I said sadness.
No, but the sadness is there too. It's just so sad that are there are so many beings on this planet that are just so cruel, and I'm sad and angry about it. No, you're right. There is some sadness as well.
Gotcha. Do you see um, do you see God anywhere?
At the moment, I don't think so. I want to. I do. I mean, it's like where I want to see the light at the end of the tunnel. I want to
Mhm.
know where is it? Why, what can I do? And maybe I do see him or the God energy when I do see success in changing things for the better.
Gotcha. So you don't see God in the journey?
Not at the moment, no.
Yeah. So would I gotcha. Do you would this is like what happens for me is
Mm-hmm.
it's like I can intellectually see that,
Gotcha. Mm-hmm.
but I don't feel it in my heart. So I guess my question is, does your head see it? Like we can always answer, oh God, like, especially Unity people, God's
Mm-hmm.
everywhere. I'm like, no, no, come on now.
I'm sure there's a reason why I can see God there. I'm sure there's a reason why I'm going through all that and why I feel that way.
Hmm.
But I don't feel God at the
Ah,
moment.
gotcha.
Okay.
Yeah. I just ask you some simple questions.
Sure.
It's like, have you asked?
No.
Okay. Okay.
Okay. Yeah, you're right. That's probably that simple. Probably is. Yeah.
Yeah. So, and if we were to stretch that question out, if you were
Mm-hmm.
to ask, what might you see?
Hmm. I don't know.
Yeah.
Maybe I would see it. Maybe it's really that simple that if I just ask, I would see it. And maybe I do have visions or epiphanies where I see, okay, this is why this is being put in front of me. So maybe, I don't know. I don't know. Maybe I would.
Yeah. I'm thinking of Rumi, and I don't remember the quote of like what I can feel. I also just want to say what I feel. I feel
Mm-hmm.
I can feel a churning of fire that's like in my own heart of just this constriction of wanting to
Mm-hmm.
set free.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of what I'm feeling right now.
Yeah.
Um, and I'm I don't remember the Rumi quote, but it feels as though the source with a capital S of your
Mm-hmm.
frustration and your anger and your sadness is the very thing that is exactly what's calling you to make the difference.
Mm-hmm.
That they're not distinguishable from each other.
Yeah. And then I think if, no, not if, but being a light worker, I think that, and maybe that's just like an egotistical thing to say, but why don't we have an easier life? If we're here to make a difference, we should be in a more position of power and not the light workers having to struggle, and then the young souls who are doing all these bad or mean things, they're in a different position of power. Does that make sense? It's almost feel like it should be reversed. It's like if we're here to teach and make things better, don't give us such a hard life so we have strength and the energy to be out there more, if that makes sense what I'm trying to say.
Sure. I'm also hearing that it's hard for you right now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Anything else you want to say about that?
um no, actually, no, I do not.
Okay. All right. I think feels like a good spot to kind
Yeah.
of
Yes. Mm-hmm.
break and So I want to say first that sometimes this is just so because it's simple, but it's not easy. And
Yeah.
sometimes just sitting down with someone once a month comes down to the question that I ask. It's like, well, have you looked for it? It's just like we just need a little like, oh, I haven't been. Oh,
Yeah. No, you're right. You're absolutely right. And the funny thing is, I do readings for people, and a lot of times I tell them, they're like, oh my God, what can I do? And I'm like, you have to work with your spirit guides. All you need to do is ask them. But here I am, and I'm not doing for myself what I tell other people to do. So, yeah.
yeah, and I'll interject here that some of my favorite work is with people who are spiritual leaders
Hmm.
who are on that we're not exempt from the and if I'll be happily suspicious.
Yeah, you're right.
I mean, I'm happy to be suspicious. It's fine to be suspicious of spiritual leaders who think there's not plenty of work or doubt or what have you, and
Yeah.
that they can continue to do their own work and they should be nurtured. You should be nurtured, Bettina.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you. But that was good. Just talking about it, I think, to somebody who understands,
Hmm.
is really liberating because when you don't have that community, and that probably goes for everybody else out there too. If you don't have your tribe or your community, everything you say, people look at you sideways and they're like, Psh, you're kind of like weird. You're out there. And that really is just like detrimental to your spiritual health as well if you're not validated.
There's
Yes.
a that reminds me of I did a talk last Saturday for some of Joni and I's coworkers. They do a women's continental breakfast to raise money for their ministries, and they invited me to come share my story. The title of it was "Nevertheless, She Persisted," and so they do testimonies, and so I came and I shared my story, and we were also to as we were giving our testimony to tell the story of a woman in the Bible, and I chose Hagar, who's she the one of the versions of the story goes that she was an Egyptian princess whose father sold her into slavery because he would, and I quote, rather her be a slave or servant in someone else's home than a leader in his home. And so he sold her into slavery to Sarah. And then the story goes that the law of the land was that if a wife did not produce an heir, and the man's bloodline was potentially going to be ended, the wife was responsible for providing him with a slave so he could carry on his bloodline. And that ended up being Hagar. And Sarah became very jealous and enraged at the relationship that she perceived in her mind that Hagar was having with Abraham. We all nowadays know that there was no relationship there. There was a slave being raped by a man, right? And so she was out in the wilderness. She ran away because she was being beaten by Sarah, and she was out in the wilderness, and she saw God. And she heard the voice of God, and she named God El Roi, which means God who sees me. And so I went down a little bit of a path of what it feels like to be seen, understood, and validated. And so for me, a spiritual director is a variation of El Roi. It is the person who sees you, who hears you, who understands you, and who validates you when you are on your own spiritual journey. That is that Sherpa. That's that person who says, do you see God in this? Do you see, where do you see God? What are you feeling? What is happening here? And guides you into your own crevices and your own mountains within you, your own canyons, just as a Sherpa does. So you're absolutely right, Bettina. It's amazing to have someone see us and validate us. And that is the role of a spiritual director. And it's not that they're a yes person, because Joni's also challenged me to some things. She's made me stop, and she's like, she's said some things. She's not just, yes, okay, yes, I understand. She's also like, are you sure? Let's go a little bit deeper into that. Let's not stop there. Let's go deeper into that crevice, that crack, but that's what happens when you have an hour-long session as opposed to like 10 or 15 minutes.
Yes.
So they're not yes people, but they are that variation of El Roi. They are that variation of someone who sees me and really, truly sees me.
That was
I was
good.
going to
Thank
say,
you so much.
I was going to say, are you sure is like one of my favorite questions. Now it's not a technique. It's just like when it comes up, it's like, oh, are you sure?
Yeah, but thank you for giving me that sample, Joni. That was really good. I enjoyed it. Thank you.
Good. Thank you.
So if somebody wanted,
that's a 20-minute or 30.
Yeah, of course.
Boy, I'll tell you what, Indira just that. You can count on Indira to go deep. So,
God is dead.
I noticed.
We're there. So how much, if somebody wanted to hire a spiritual director, so we have a website. If they want to hire a spiritual director, and Bettina will get that up there. And I think it's the website that is titled sdicompanions.org. That one? Okay, there we go. So if someone were to want to hire a spiritual director for a monthly companioning, what would that potentially look like, Joni?
First, the website here is sdicompanions.org, and that is the clearinghouse, for lack of a better way of putting it, for spiritual directors. It's Spiritual Directors International is what the SDI is for. And there are over 6,600. So if you're wondering if this is a thing, it's a thing.
It's a real thing.
I like that.
Yeah, so there are 6,600 of us, over that probably in the database there. And you can search for a spiritual director there. Your area, would you like a woman? Do you want someone who's LGBTQ help, and just all kinds of things that are beautiful. And so you can go there. What it costs is a little difficult to explain, but I'll try to make it uncomplicated. Some spiritual directors don't charge anything. Some spiritual directors make it so easy to be in spiritual direction that it doesn't cost anything at all, hardly. But a typical price to pay, and by the way, I just want to say, you're not paying for an advisor. You're paying for someone's time. This is really an exchange of time. It's not that. So it could be anywhere, typically $60 to $100 for the hour.
So economical.
It is. It really is.
And some spiritual directors go up to 150. Some do. I'll start at 30, what have you. But the typical is 60 to 100. And always, always, always remember that for the most part, I have never encountered a spiritual director who will not see you based on finance. So that's always available. There's a reciprocity that can be worked out, because this is a spiritual exchange. It is not a financial exchange. This is not a goods thing. This is a spiritual exchange. So you can do that,
which is beautiful, actually.
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
Thank you for doing that.
If you are listening and you're a Unity person, and you would be more comfortable with a spiritual director who has that sort of background, you can go to unityspiritualdirection.org, and down at the bottom of the page, you can click on Find a Spiritual Director. And we have some folks who are New Thought and Unity spiritual directors.
Wow.
And if you think that this is something that you want to do, if you think that you are geared towards spiritual direction, which is something you and I've talked about for 3 years, it is something that I feel like at some point I'm going to get the light bulb where it's like, now it's time to enroll in spiritual direction. Not there quite yet, but definitely it's on my list. Tell us about the program.
Sure. So the first thing I want to say is what's important about any spiritual direction program that you do, and there's lots out there, is that, as Indira, you have said, we want you when the light bulb goes off. This is it's and the biggest piece of what's available in spiritual direction is discernment.
Yes.
It is perfect for when you're trying to make a decision or come to some sort of conclusion about something you need to do in life. So it follows that it is appropriate for us to allow for that discernment to be very clear before you jump out.
Mm-hmm.
In our program, and there are many, as I said, and our program is a 2-year long program, and it is available. What we look for is folks who are at a point in their spiritual evolution that they're ready to companion others on theirs. And often that shows up as people who have had a long-term commitment to a spiritual community, and that spiritual community could be a church, it could be an ashram, it could be it could be a yoga studio, it could be you do spiritual coaching, it could be a lot of any of those things. And we also allow for discernment in that sort of broad opportunity that we can give to everyone. It is not exclusive to people of a certain religion. We do have tenets in our of unitive consciousness and things like that. Our program is also it doesn't have a particular religious bent. We're interspiritual. And that's one of the key reasons that this program was created. It was to offer this to folks who don't have a religious jargon, if you will. A lot of the practices we borrow from or work with in spiritual direction in general have to do with, well, there's Catholic, there the Ignatian, there's several religions that we pull from. But we also pull from Buddhism. Any contemplative practices from many religions and faith traditions that we use. So it's whatever suits you. But our particular program is for folks who are interspiritual rather than have a religious background. So that's
and that website is the unityspiritualdirection.org. They could find out more.
Yes.
And correct me if I'm wrong, it's how much is the program? It's a 2-year program, and it's a certain amount each year.
Yes.
And
so the first year is $3,500.
And there's 4 terms. So you start in the fall.
Yes.
So it's fall,
Mhm.
winter, spring, summer.
That's right.
And then you start your second term.
That's right. And the second term is $33.50. We just changed the price. I would have to, I think it is $33.50.
And that's only 3 terms. That's fall,
Right.
winter, spring.
And yes. And while it's 3 quarters that second year, the second year is when you enter into an internship. It is actually less time, but more intense. You can expect to have to do an internship. You'll work with. We're going to ask you to work with 2 people. I say ask. We're going to require you to work with 2 people as their spiritual director. So you'll work with at least 2 people. You will take the work that you're doing into your classwork. You'll take it into the work that you'll do with the supervisor. This is important in terms of, I want to speak in terms of choosing a spiritual director and also our program. Ethically, it is important for your spiritual director to also have a spiritual director. And if they are practicing with any level of consistency with others, they should also be in supervision themselves. And supervision is much like in mental health counseling, you have a supervisor that you take your stuff to. A supervisor is someone who we go to and we take those things that are stirring for us, not like in a spiritual direction session, but the things that are stirring for us in regard to the work we've done with someone. so that we continue to explore our own barriers and our own spiritual
Mm-hmm.
stirrings that
Mm-hmm.
someone else may have. It's spiritual direction for the spiritual director is
Right.
what supervision is. So
I
you'll
like
do
that.
that as well. And there's a couple of retreats that are part of the work. They're not outside of those quarterly classes that Indira spoke about, but they are. There's one at the end of the fourth quarter, and one at the in the first year, and one at the end of the third quarter in the second.
And right now they're currently online, correct? The retreats are
They
currently
are.
online.
Yes,
Mhm.
all we in the accessibility of we have discovered that the best way to make this accessible to everyone is all of the courses are online. So we have had
Yeah.
folks from Canada, Australia, all the time zones in the United States. And classes are, by the way, in the evening twice a week.
Cool.
And then you also have a Substack. Tell us what
That is-
Substack is and what are you doing with Substack?
Substack is, y'all remember blogs. So
Yeah.
Substack is a place where writers go to write about their stuff.
Mhm.
There's also you can do podcasts there, and I do have a Substack, and we talk. I ramble on about spiritual direction, and spiritual companionship, and spiritual things that are occurring, and um, uh, my musings, if you will, most of all on spirituality and spiritual direction. So there's that,
Wonderful.
and I'm working on a podcast for my spiritual friends, as I mentioned
Yes.
at the beginning.
When is that going to come out? Do you know? Do you have
Uh,
a
Sometime in June. Um,
Okay.
I am working through wrangling people to speak with, but we've got some stuff we do have some stuff in the can right now. So
Wonderful.
Ooh.
And
We're so
if they
happy.
want to know about your podcast, they would go to the jonilorraine.com and
yes,
you'll have a link there.
or
Perfect.
you can do that, or you can go to spiritualdirection.substack.com also.
Perfect.
Ooh.
Wonderful. And so if they want to have you as their spiritual director, can they contact you at jonilorraine.com or would you prefer them to go to sdicompanions.org?
They can go to jonilorraine.com.
Perfect.
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 Yes.
Anything
Gosh, this
else
was
you
so
want to
good.
leave us with, Joni?
Yeah.
Anything at all? Any wisdom?
Wisdom, hilarious. Um, yeah, I do. One of the things that I didn't say is that, and I really love this. Someone described me once as either the most serious, fun person they know, or the most fun, serious person they know. And I use that not to, oh, it's all about me. I don't do that to talk about me. I do that to say that spirituality can be lighthearted. These are not just all serious matters,
Mm-hmm.
and we can have fun about serious matters, and we can be serious about things too. So spiritual direction does not have to be this heavy thing. Dredging, it is not necessarily dredging things up all the time. It's
Yeah.
more exploration. So
Gotcha.
I invite you, if you're interested in spiritual direction, to take that exploration with someone who would be happy to be your Sherpa on the journey.
Cool.
Thank you,
Thank
Joni.
you.
Thanks for
Sure.
being here today.
My pleasure. Thank you guys.
Thank you. That
Yes.
was so powerful. Thank you so much.
Sure.
Yeah.